There you go.
Good evening. Welcome to the January 20th, 2021 meeting of the Oxford, Ohio Board of Zoning Appeals. This meeting is being held virtually under the authority of Ohio House Bill 404 and in compliance with the Ohio Open Meetings Act. Mr. Conard, would you like a roll call of the members?
Yes, I think it would be appropriate.
Thank you. Where is he? Mr. Moore, would you call the roll, please?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I can call the roll. I'll start with Mr. Ames,
Present.
Mr. Hazeman,
Present.
Ms. Rumanier,
Here.
Mr. Allison,
Here.
Mr. Schnipper.
Here. Since this is our first meeting of the new year, first order of business is the election of officers. Is there a nomination for chairman?
I nominate Mike Schnipper.
Thank you,
I
sir.
second.
It's been seconded. Other nominations? Mr. Conard, would you like a roll call on this?
I think it would be appropriate since it's an officer of the body.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Moore, would you call the roll again for us?
Yes, sir. Start again with Mr. Ames,
Aye.
Mr. Hazeman,
Yes.
Ms. Rumanier,
Yes.
Mr. Allison,
Yes.
Mr. Schnipper.
Yes. Next is vice chair. Is there a nomination for vice chair?
I nominate Roger Ames.
Thank you, sir. Is there a second?
I'll second.
There is a second. Other nominations? Seeing none, Mr. Moore, roll call again, please.
Okay. Mr. Ames,
Yes.
Mr. Hazeman,
Yes.
Ms. Rumanier,
Yes.
Mr. Allison,
Yes.
Mr. Schnipper.
Yes. And finally, we need a secretary. And hoping that we've not overworked Dan Hazeman in his previous tenure, I'd like to nominate Dan as secretary.
Second.
Is there a second?
I'll
second.
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 Well-
Other nominations? Without other nominations, Mr. Moore, roll call, please.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Starting again, Mr. Ames,
Yes.
Mr. Hazeman,
Yes.
Ms. Rumanier,
Yes.
Mr. Allison,
Yes.
Mr. Schnipper.
Yes. And Mr. Conard, would you like to do the swearing in for us, please?
Indeed, I would. After I've done the swearing in, I will be leaving the meeting, and Ben Mazer will handle all aspects related to the legal. So all members of the BZA were prepared to administer the oath of office for this term. And frankly, I never thought about this. I wonder when the last time the BZA was being sworn in, the last time the President of the United States was also being sworn in. That's
Don't get us confused.
that'll keep staff busy for a while figuring that one out. But anyway, it's obviously an important day in the country's history, and equally important for what the BZA does for the community in the city of Oxford. So would all members of the BZA please raise their right hand? I state your name.
I,
Aye.
Michael Schnipper,
Allison.
Solemnly swear that
solemnly swear that
I will support the Constitution of the United States
I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the state of Ohio,
and the
and
state of
the state of
Ohio,
Ohio,
and will obey the law. Will obey all the laws thereof,
and will
and
obey the
obey
laws
all the
thereof,
laws thereof,
and I will in all respects
and I will
and
in
I
all
will in all
respects
uphold and enforce the provisions of the Charter
uphold and
Uphold and
enforce
enforce
the
the
provisions of the
of
Charter
the Charter
and ordinances of the city of Oxford,
and
and
ordinances of the
ordinance
city of Oxford,
and will faithfully discharge the duties of the Board of Zoning Appeals
and
And
will
will
faithfully discharge the duties
the
of the
duties
Board
of
of
the
Zoning
Board of Zoning
Appeals
Appeals
of the city of Oxford upon which I am a member.
of the city of
of the city of
Oxford, upon which I am a
which I'm a
member.
member.
Thank you. You are sworn in. I think I did a better job than the last time. Congratulations.
Thank you,
Yay.
sir. And thank you, board. And, I'd like to express my appreciation. Very needed function in the city, and I appreciate your service to the city. Okay, let's get down to some business. Next order of business is approval of the December 9, 2020 minutes.
Move.
Well, are there any additions, deletions, or corrections? Without that, is there a motion to approve the minutes?
I so move.
Thank you, sir.
Second.
And it's seconded. Any objection to approval of the minutes? Without objection, the minutes are approved. We have two cases to hear tonight, BZA 2020-12 and 13. We're going to do 12 first. Is there a motion to enter into an adjudication hearing?
I so move.
Thank you, Dan. Second?
I'll
I'll
second.
second.
Seconded. And without objection, we're now in adjudication. And Zach, are you going to present for the city?
Yes, I will, Mr. Chair.
Please state your name and job title for the record
Zachary Moore, planner for the city of Oxford.
and raise your right hand for me. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in matters before this board?
I do.
Thank you, sir. Please proceed.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll go ahead and pull up my screen for everyone. I figured just in the interest of time and just due to the similarity between the two cases that we have on the agenda for tonight, BZA 2020-12 and -13, they're both for the same exact section of our zoning code, and they're also on the same exact site. So this presentation that I will go through right now will actually be for both cases. But I believe we're going to need two separate motions, one for each building. And I'll of course defer to our legal representation for input on those lines. So with that, I will go ahead and begin my presentation. So the applicant is Scott Webb Architect. The property owner is H&P Properties, Inc. The current zoning of the site is Neighborhood Business District NB is the abbreviation for that. The current use of the site, it's vacant, but it's intended to convert to a mixed use project. And the proposal, the applicant is seeking variances from section 1141.03B, which requires a principal entrance to be upon a street. The past precedent in the community is that this applies to the principal entrance applicable to every use within a structure, and that includes residential as well as commercial use. So again, the two variances, the first one, BZA 2020-12, corresponds to 5115 Morning Sun Road. That is in the northeast corner of the site if you happen to be looking at the site plan in the packet. And then 5111, that is BZA 2020-13. Again, that's the same section number, but that's for the building on the southwest portion of the lot. So hopefully that's all clear to everyone. Here's a look at the location aerial. This is at the northwest corner of West Sycamore Street and State Route 732, Morning Sun Road. Here's a look at the zoning classifications in the area. So there's an office industrial zone to the north and to the east. There is the R2MS district to the west, and then there is an R1MS district to the south. This is the only property, by the way, that is currently mapped as a neighborhood business zoning district in the city. Here's a bird's eye view looking to the north. So you can see within vicinity, there's the veterinary hospital to the north, the Best Western Sycamore Inn to the east. There's a variety of residential dwellings within the immediate vicinity as well. And here's another view looking to the west. Okay, so the relevant zoning provision reads as follows in section 1141.03B. It says that every building hereafter erected, converted, enlarged, reconstructed, or structurally altered shall be located on a lot of record and shall have its principal entrance upon a street bordering such lot. And then there's additional language in there that addresses alley lots, which the subject lot is not. So the main part that is requiring the variance tonight is the statement about the principal entrance. So here is a look at the submitted site plan. You might recall that the BZA previously saw last year a variance request to the lot coverage increasing that from 50% up to 50.56%, I believe it was. So just a slight increase. But the BZA did approve that variance. So this is actually the second time that you guys have seen this particular proposal. But just to highlight the different entrances that are being proposed. So the commercial entrances effectively comply with the principal entrance provision because they face Morning Sun Road for 5115 and Sycamore Street for 5111 respectively. So it's really the residential entrances that are in the back that face the private parking area that's back there. Those are the ones that are requiring variances. So here's the submitted rendering, just showing the front of the building. So you can see there's kind of a patio seating area located between the structures. And then the main entrances to the commercial units, which will be shell units at first. So not having defined uses for those spaces as of yet, but just reserving them for commercial use there on the first floor. And there's also ramps that go down to the parking area just so that everything is ADA compliant. The way that the slope is on the site, it just kind of gradually slopes down as you move away from both of the street. So the applicant is taking advantage of the site's natural slope to put in kind of a basement level below both buildings. So they're effectively going to be meeting their minimum parking requirement for the residential units by having a minimum of 2 parking spaces per unit. Each building will have 2 residential units, and those will be located on the 2nd and 3rd floors. And then the parking will be in the basement level, and there will be a stairwell that connects all of that. And I'll show you some floor plans here in a minute, but just to call attention here on the rendering, here's the locations outlined in yellow where those entrances are going to be. And something I also thought would be worth pointing out, and this was in my comments to the building permits that were submitted back in December. One of my comments was to have some pedestrian connectivity through these particular areas here so that folks that are parking in the back here for the commercial uses, that they have a way to have more of a direct connection up to the front entrances of the commercial units. So not really directly related to the variance request tonight, but just thought I would mention it. So going through the floor plans that were submitted as part of the building permit. So this is the basement plan. So you can see there's 2 parking spaces per unit. So again, there's a total of 4 units, 2 per building, and those dwelling units are going to be located on the 2nd and 3rd floors. So you can see there's in blue here in the middle, this is the stairwell that's going to link those floors together. And this is where that front entrance will be off of the parking area right here. And then the first floor, of course, is the commercial spaces. So the main front entrances to the commercial will be up here in front facing the street. And then the entrances off of the stairwell will effectively be rear entrances, secondary entrances to those spaces. And then once you get to the 2nd floor, so the actual front doors of each of those units will be on this floor. And you can see the units separated here with the different yellow highlighted lines. And then the 3rd floor, that's where that stairwell disappears. So there's just a separated wall down the middle that keeps the 2 units distinct from one another. Okay, so I'll end with the decision criteria. Starting with criterion A, whether the property in question will yield reasonable return or whether there can be any beneficial use. So the property is currently vacant and has been for some time, and staff believes there can in fact be beneficial use of the property that would yield a reasonable return without the variance. The property as currently exists is developable by right under the standards of the NB district, which allows for a number of permitted uses and a host of conditional uses. The applicant could choose to provide entrances for the upper level residential units that would directly face the streets, though this could in effect reduce the amount of available square footage and lead to reduced return. And that's as it pertains to that commercial square footage, especially there on the first floor. However, the resulting return would likely still be found reasonable, as it would simply take adjusting or increasing the amount of area that's devoted to those common hallways, stairwells, without completely compromising the ability to provide the commercial space. So for those reasons, staff feels that criterion A does not support granting the variance. With criterion B, whether the variance is substantial, we find that this supports granting the variance. So the relocation of the residential principal entrance from the front to the rear, this particular case, we don't feel it's going to have a substantial effect on the overall building design, the ability to service the property, or creating adverse impacts to adjoining properties. Criterion C, whether the essential character would be substantially altered, we feel that this criterion supports the variance. So the building design as a whole, it's still oriented toward the public realm by having the main commercial entrances out on Morning Sun and Sycamore. So when you're just locating the residential entrances in the rear in this particular case, we don't feel that this is going to have a compromising effect on the overall design. I think that's pretty clear when we look to the renderings that have been submitted. So we feel that this is still in keeping with the spirit of the NB district. So again, we feel this criterion supports the variance. With criterion D, whether it would adversely affect governmental services. So we did not really hear back from many city departments on this one. I did touch base with the fire chief. There were some comments that he relayed. He did comment that the location of the entrances is acceptable to him since this site has been comprehensively planned and designed. So it'll just be a natural inclination for any first responders that may have to drive to this particular site, that they're just going to be entering the parking lot in an event of an emergency. He has requested the turning radius information to ensure that emergency vehicles can adequately access the back portion of the property, but he agreed that this could be handled as part of the building permit review as it goes through the process. So with that, he is in favor of the request. And since we did not receive any other comments from city departments, we feel that criterion D as a whole does support granting the variance. Criterion E is whether the property owner purchased the property with knowledge of the restriction. So the applicant indicates in his letter that the owner was made aware of the past interpretation and application of the standard, but has chosen to proceed with the current plan since it was seen, at least by the applicant, as the most desirable option. So we don't feel that there's evidence that would make our finding be seen that it would be contributing to the variance or supporting the variance. So our finding with this one is it does not support the variance. With criterion F, whether the property owner's predicament feasibly can be obviated through some other method. This one we find does not support the variance. So what the applicant could choose to do is provide entrances that are directly facing the public streets. And the applicant hints that at the very least, this would be ceremonial in nature. But there's several negative consequences that are noted with this option. First one, which I've already mentioned, is a likely reduction, kind of cutting into that available commercial space. The entrance might rarely be utilized by the residential tenants who are accessing via those private garages off the back. However, we would also note that having a front-facing entrance could actually provide a more engaging way for residents to access the immediate urban environment on foot, exiting and entering adjacent to the front edge rather than taking the back way around. So for those reasons, we feel it does not support granting the variance. Criterion G, whether the spirit and intent would be observed. We believe that it would, so we find that criterion G supports granting the variance. So the spirit and intent behind this zoning provision, we believe it's threefold. The first is neighborhood character, to ensure that buildings don't have a sideways appearance. As you may have noticed in town, there's lots of examples, particularly in the Mile Square, where buildings don't have front entrances facing the street. So it looks a little odd, having kind of that sideways appearance. The other intent that we believe is behind this requirement is public health and safety, which is probably the more important requirement. So having readily apparent access for emergency personnel arriving on the scene, that kind of thing. And then the third is just general navigability, reducing confusion for visitors and deliveries. So that kind of relates to the public safety and first responder purpose. So we as staff, we believe all three of these purposes are upheld by this particular variance request, seeing as how the building will still present itself as being oriented toward the street due to the main commercial entrances. The private curb cuts and parking lot aisles should be natural points of access for reaching those upper level dwelling units for both emergency responders as well as visitors and deliveries to those units. The inclusion of unit address numbers on the doors could also help make unit access more visible to those arriving on site. The BZA may rely on any other relevant factor that the applicant wishes to present as testimony. And as you may have seen in the staff report, considering all the evidence as a whole, staff believes there is substantial evidence to support granting this particular variance request. I should say 2 variance requests, both for 5115 and for 5111. And I believe that concludes my report. I have not received any public comments to date on this particular item. Happy to take any questions from the board.
Thank you, Zach. As always, very thorough. Any questions from the board?
Yes.
Go ahead, please.
Zach, could you flip back to that first floor plan? Kind of went through those kind of quick. On the egress to the residence, is the basement stairway going to be the only egress in and out? Is there any way to get back to the front in an emergency?
Yes, that's a good question. So the only other way to access the units would be to actually go through the commercial spaces. You know, once those become occupied, assuming that they would let people just walk right through their stores, and there's no telling, you know, once they set up interior walls, you know, whether those back areas will be off limits to customers. But you know, theoretically, it might be possible to come in through the front, travel here to the back, and then enter the stairwell that way. But then the only other way to get into that stairwell, as shown, would be just coming through the garages themselves. So once you pull in your car, just walking up to the stairway and going through the interior door to get into that stairwell.
Which I think presents a safety problem. If something happens in that stairwell or the parking lot, how do the residents get out in an emergency? So I personally like the idea of having the availability for those residents to be able to get out that front commercial entrance. Or a front commercial or a front residential entrance, one or the other.
Well, along those lines, Roger, even if we were to put the entrance for the residential units at the front of the building, Zach, am I correct that we'd still have one means of getting in and out of those residential units?
I believe that's correct, yes.
Aren't 2 means of egress required?
You know, I think that's getting into the fire code, which I don't have expertise on per se. I know that Sam is on the call. If he has any information that he's able to offer, I might invite him to speak, if that's okay, Mr. Chair.
Certainly. Let's get through with the Q&A for what you've got, and then if Sam wants to weigh in, we'll do that. Point of clarification. We had previous variances granted for this for lot coverage. Just clarification, why was this not included in that meeting?
It was not known at the time that this provision was not going to be complied with.
Okay. Like I said, just clarification. Thank you.
This came to light through the building permit review process.
Thanks. Any other board members? Chris, you've got a question?
Yes, I do. It's my understanding that somewhere else in the code, it's required to have a sidewalk directly from the street to the entrance, and yet I don't see any entrance, any passageway except walking in the driveway.
Yeah, so there's the sidewalks that are right here that would link to the public sidewalk.
But they don't, none of them go to the back entrance.
Well, the way of accessing it would be to follow these pathways around the building. Yeah, there wouldn't be, you know, a very direct path, but there would be a path nonetheless. And again, that was one of the comments that I delivered in my building permit review, was to ensure that those pathways do in fact get linked up to the back parking areas. So
Okay.
hopefully those will be included with the revised submittal.
And I do take exception with the ceremonial aspect of the front entrance. I believe that to the extent these are student housing, they're going to arrive on foot or from either by walking from uptown, the university, or from the bus stop. And I think on a daily basis, it's more foot traffic, bike traffic than it is car traffic.
I agree.
Chris, question for you. With what Zach's got on the screen right now, if the areas outlined in red were added as pathways, paved concrete pathways, would that salve your concern?
I would need somebody to define direct, because these are not direct pathways.
The areas in red are not a direct pathway to you?
Not to the street,
Okay.
because you have to walk through the driveway to get to these, or you have to come from the intersection.
Correct me if
And
I'm
then-
wrong. As we're looking at this slide, at the far, go back one, Zach, where we were. What I'm going to point out is that on the far left-hand side, we've got Morning Sun Road. There's a rendering of a car in place, and if you look, there's a sidewalk there that comes off of the public sidewalk, goes past that car, and would come back and tie into the area that Zach has got outlined in red. And I would consider that a direct pathway, wouldn't you?
That's why I say I would
Yeah.
need to have direct defined, because to me, a direct pathway doesn't require zigzagging, which most people will not do.
Okay.
I agree with Chris.
Okay.
You need to go from the red to the yellow. And there's no way to go from the red to the yellow without going through the parking lot.
Okay.
Also,
Well,
that road where the path goes off is the driveway, not Morning Sun Road, right? Isn't Morning Sun Road on the other side of the green space?
Yeah.
No, that's Morning
Right.
Sun.
That's Morning Sun where he's got his,
Okay, that is Morning Sun. Okay, and there's the path
Cursor.
that's Morning Sun. Okay.
yeah.
The other
Okay.
thing, and looking at the first floor diagram, it looks like if you widen the separation between the walls, between the two commercial spaces, you really don't lose that much space to have a fire code walkway, which is what, 30 or 36 inches from the front door to the stairwell.
Okay.
So I'm leaning to, for those reasons, saying that a front entrance is something that should be required.
Okay. All right.
Ask for more clarification on that dual entryway for fire code.
All right. Good point on both of those. Any other questions for Zach? Without any further questions, Zach, thank you for your input on this. As I said, always very professionally done. Scott Webb, are you going to present for the appellant?
Yes,
Wake up.
please. Yep.
Okay. Scott, as usual, state your name and title for the record, please.
Scott Webb. I'm a licensed architect in Ohio representing H&P Properties this evening.
Thank you, sir. Raise your right hand for me. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in matters before this board?
I do.
Please proceed.
All right. Well, so as many of us know, there's a long history to this property here. It's been vacant for as long as I can remember, back to a decrepit house that was eventually removed. There's been a number of failed attempts to develop the property as a medical plan development, as residential plan development, lots of different things. Ultimately, my clients bought it, and we started talking to staff about the notion of the new zoning district neighborhood business that then required the map amendment to create the neighborhood business district here. As staff pointed out, this is the one and only neighborhood business district parcel currently in the city. From there, we proceeded with a lot split that had to go through procedures in the city. We were at Board of Zoning Appeals, as you recall, for the lot coverage, and now here we are back one more time to take a look at this entrance question. So, you know, my clients have spent a lot of time here trying to come up with a unique proposal for the city, something that would showcase what's possible in the neighborhood district, and based on the sort of best practices of mixed use design as we've discovered them here in the city of Oxford, actually. So next slide, please. So the mixed use development has been designed to allow a separation of parking. This was something that we've sort of learned from the Stewart Square model, which, as I'm sure you know, has been sort of outlined in our comp plan as a model for mixed use developments. When we have both residents and commercial patrons competing for parking spaces on the site, the best way to resolve that is to create a parking space for the residents, specifically for the residents and only for the residents, that encourages them to make sure they park there. The idea, that we started in the large scale at Stewart Square was that if we had the residential entrances facing the streets, then we would have the residents parking in the commercial parking spaces on the front of the site. And so the decision was made and supported through planning and city council to separate those entrances, to put the residential entrance to the rear, provide the residential parking in a parking garage that would guarantee that we would not be competing for those sites. We wouldn't have residents' cars lingering in the commercial spaces and make it hard for the businesses. So that's really where this thing started. Also similar to Stewart Square, we, in fact, more so, we have a significant amount of grade on this property, and enough so that, we are effectively having a walkout basement on the back. And then you can see from the extent of the ramps that are required, even to get from the parking spaces to the north, takes about 30 feet of ramp to get people from those parking spaces up to the ground floor. Likewise, on the southwest building, the ramp kind of leaves from the shared plaza there in the center. And then, as I said, we've got, about 10 feet of drop as we get toward the back of the building. So we considered this to be sort of an opportunity to kind of follow in the Stewart Square model and separate the entrances specifically and providing parking specifically for the residents. So also in doing that, some more of the complications yet to be resolved here is that, if you recall, we are providing shared access easements in order that these properties don't end up being a dead end, so that that walkout basement that we're talking about isn't a dead end on the property. This makes it easier for service vehicles to go through the entire property from Sycamore Street to Morning Sun, fight the fire from all sides, presumably, and just for ease of traffic in the direction, being able to come out at the light in either direction that you'd like to do. So then if we could move on to the next slide, please. So that being said, this kind of shows how that would work. I think Zach has done a nice job sort of pointing that out to us. I didn't provide any floor plans here. I didn't know we were going to get into building code concerns tonight, but let me address those directly. Safety is not a matter of opinion. Safety is a matter of the Ohio Building Code. This building, being a mixed-use building, will be a sprinkled building, and one exit is all that is required from the apartments to the grade level in a sprinkled building as such. If you hopefully understood what Zach was showing there, the apartment entrances are actually on the second floor, and then they're effectively townhouses. They have internal stairs inside each apartment. So the shared stair only goes up to the second story, and then each townhouse has its own internal stair in there. So the building code is clear. These buildings have been reviewed by our chief building official, plan reviewers, and the building departments, and there is no issue with the location of the entrance from a building code perspective. There's no issue with regard to the number of exits with regard to the building code, or any requirement for a second means of egress. So, we feel that that is certainly accounted for. And as we've heard from the fire department, they feel that they can certainly access this building and fight the fire from all sides. With regard to the foot traffic connection, I completely understand and respect Zach's suggestion that those sidewalks should continue around to give the residents an opportunity to get there. The notion of crossing a residential driveway, I think, is perhaps a little bit exaggerated here. There's certainly properties all over town in neighborhoods where you park your car in your driveway and your sidewalk just simply leaves from your driveway to your front door. It's not always that we duplicate that sidewalk and also run one all the way out to the street. This is not we're not crossing a parking garage entrance. We're not crossing anything more than you have in your own house, just a simple 2-car garage that belongs to you. So, we really don't consider having to cross your own driveway to be an impedance to public access. The notion of what direct means, how direct is direct, and whether or not you're allowed to zigzag, I think is kind of overstating the point here. We don't define zigzag, we don't define it by distance or anything like that. So I believe with Zach's suggestion, we're certainly meeting the intent of the code in providing that. So I just simply think that the building as designed does meet the spirit and intent here. As I said, being able to walk across your own driveway to join a sidewalk, I think is not dangerous or detrimental in any way. So I can move on to the next slide then, if we would, please. So the decision standards, as I said, this site is perhaps more difficult than we've made it look. The amount of grade that is being dealt with here, as I kind of pointed out, in order to try to meet handicap accessibility, to meet the primary entrance on the street, to make sure that all residents can get there from the sidewalk, was not exactly an easy thing to do. This is going to be an expensive site to develop as well. And with regard to the first decision standard, I'm not sure how we can define a reasonable return. That seems like a very arbitrary sort of standard, in my opinion. It's our opinion that we have done what we believe to be the best for this particular site, looking at that walkout and the opportunity to separate these entrances as just that, as an opportunity rather than a detriment. And with the encouragement, or at least acceptance, of the fire department, who's normally against things like this, I think it's certainly reasonable. I appreciate what staff has mentioned on the second decision standard. We don't believe the variance is substantial. The buildings do face the street. I agree that staff has a history of interpreting the code that way, that every principal entrance must face the street. It's not really what it says, but nonetheless, we are providing buildings that face the street and address the street in a profound way. And we're here tonight to ask about the place for the residents that will live upstairs. We feel that the essential character of the neighborhood would be improved and certainly unaffected by this particular variance. This property, as I said, has been vacant. This results in lots of connecting sidewalks and business opportunity, and our first opportunity to develop a neighborhood business site. The delivery of government services has been addressed through our building code review. You haven't heard from engineering because we're working with Bayer Becker, and Bayer Becker has been working with the engineering department with regard to utilities and those sorts of things, and had no particular comment. Everything is certainly doable and certainly not affected by this variance. Again, because we're working with Bayer Becker, they don't produce site plans that don't meet the city's requirements for turning radiuses and safety with regard to the fire vehicles. So as I said, it was not an easy feat to make all this happen on this site, but the ingenuity of Bayer Becker's engineers helped us to work with the grade to be able to meet all the requirements, radiuses, slopes, and everything else for the fire department and for engineering. And that would certainly include stormwater and things like that. Whether the property owners purchased the property with knowledge of the restriction, yes, we did, but looking at this as a comprehensive design of a couple of buildings, again, more in the model of Stewart Square, we felt that the lessons learned from that and the guidelines provided by the comprehensive plan about mixed use, made more sense in this particular location. Given that the grade that we're talking about, if we were to have a front entrance, I called it ceremonial in the sense that the residence parking is more than 100 feet away and a story below. So the odds of the actual residents using those entrances, we just feel is not going to happen. I mean, we will likely, the stair also provides our second means of egress for the commercial spaces, which could be required depending on what their ultimate tenant finish is there, though it's not required for the residents or could be required for the commercial. So that stair is going to be there regardless, and it's going to go to the basement as the second means of egress to the exterior for the commercial spaces. So if we were to put an additional entrance, not an entrance instead of, but an additional entrance on the front of the building, we're calling it ceremonial because, as I said, it's 100 feet from where you park and a story below, and there's going to be a door right there in your garage or right there looking at you at your parking space to be able to go to your residence. So, we feel that the spirit and intent has certainly been made for that. That certainly speaks to the notion of the whether the predicament can be feasibly obviated through some other method. Yes, it can, but I'm not sure that we actually have a predicament to be solved. I mean, the predicament is more code related than actual, given that we can meet the building code and that the entrance would simply rarely, if ever, be used. And then finally, we feel that the spirit and intent is observed. If you recall from our lot coverage questions, in addition to the commercial spaces that we're doing here, we're providing a public plaza to connect the buildings to try to create some life on the street down there. These buildings absolutely address the street, face the street, and are upon a street. And with the fire department's blessing and using the model of Stewart Square, we feel that the spirit and intent is observed by allowing this the residential entrance to the rear. I'm more than happy to focus a little more on the connection and the potential additional sidewalk to give those residents the easier walking path or bicycle path, perhaps. But I would certainly hope that the notion of having this entrance in this location would not be rejected over the sidewalk. So I'd be happy to answer any questions, and that's all I have for you tonight.
Thank you, Scott. As always, well done. Kate, do you have a question?
Yeah, I got a question about lighting. My only, this might go beyond, I don't know what this goes beyond, but my only concern about the entrance in the back is that people will be entering from a parking lot that's facing the woods and it could be dark. So are there certain provisions for lighting that are required and more that are planned?
So our lighting standards in the building code are generally trying to prevent overlighting, so that we don't have necessarily minimum light standards. That being said, from a safety standpoint, I believe the drawings show wall packs, as we would call them, exterior lights mounted on the rear of the building to cast light on the street and on the parking lots down there for safety in particular.
Okay, in the back, right?
Mhm.
Okay, that's it.
Okay. Any other board members have questions? Scott, real quick, as we're looking at this view, there were areas that had been outlined in red by Zach as potential pathways. Do you feel the property developer would be willing to entertain those as an addition?
Yeah, I do actually. I would even go so far as to say it might even have been an oversight on my part. I think it's such a good idea. I wish I would have thought of it. So.
All right. Anybody else?
Mike,
Yes, Roger.
on my previous question from Zach's segment, I think Mr. Webb answered my question about the egress problem that came to my mind. Obviously, he wouldn't design a building that didn't fit within the code. As long as it fits within the code, I'm satisfied with that. Just a comment, it might be a smarter design to let the kids get out the front door too, but that's up to somebody else. But it does satisfy my question from before.
Thank you,
Well,
Roger. Go ahead.
If I could say one thing to that, keep in mind too that like your personal homes or like student rentals under 3 stories, in addition to the stairs and the fact that it's a sprinkled building and it's a protected stairway, egress windows are also required and provided, for fire department access to rescue people, just like from the 2nd floor of your own homes. So egress windows are provided in addition to the sprinkled building and a protected exit stair.
Thank you, Scott. Roger, does that satisfy your questions, concerns?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Very good. Anybody else? Without other board members having questions, we'd made a comment earlier about Sam Perry possibly having some information or want to weigh in. Sam, do you want to offer anything on this?
I would like to offer some testimony if you wouldn't mind swearing me in.
Okay, let's get you on the stream. And Sam, state your name and job title for the record, please.
Sam Perry, Community Development Director for the City of Oxford.
And do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in matters before this board?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Please proceed.
The only thing I wanted to offer everyone tonight, after listening to the presentations and the questions, is just a little bit of the historical background on the creation of the Neighborhood Business District. When we did that with the Planning Commission back several years ago, I think it's fair to say that we didn't anticipate corner lots on state routes. We were mostly looking at interior lots on blocks. We talked about the Pisana's restaurant on South Campus Avenue, and I know the Johnny's Deli on Sycamore Street. Both interior lots that are fairly small, do have residential units, but they didn't have the grade or the corner lot condition that this one does. So not that that would prevent from happening, but I thought it would be helpful to know that when you're creating zoning regulations, it's not uncommon for governments to not think of every situation. So I don't know if that changes any of your questions or the direction you want to go, but I just wanted to give a little background there. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Chris, you got a question?
Yes, a question for Sam. Yeah, in the past, I've complained about a couple of decisions because it seemed like they should go back to planning or council or wherever. In this case, I don't see that that's required, but I'm curious as to why this didn't go back to planning, as it is a fairly major variance. And I like the design, the layout, and everything, but it seems like planning should have had time to look at this and make adjustments to the code, the ordinances, so that they could learn from this development, which I think was quite well done.
Yeah, Chris, it's a good question. I think that is technically and legally an option, but it's typically not practical for a developer to wait for the legislative process to run its course. just because of the development review and bidding process. I think that's kind of the reason why the Board of Zoning Appeals was, envisioned to kind of offer the relief valve to the public, to see if a sort of a lower level relief could be offered in lieu of a full-blown zoning code change. So yes, I think that could be an option. If this were to not be approved for some reason, then that could be pursued. But just kind of, I think it fits nicely with the overall process to offer this to owners as an option, as a first attempt instead of the legislative changes. So
Okay.
good
And
question.
I understand the delay of the legislative change process, but it seems like they have a process called conditional use. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, so the conditional use is a process that's typically reserved for land uses that could have negative impacts to the surrounding properties. So ones where there's a really broad range of scale, like schools and churches, gas stations, drive-through restaurants, those type of things where there could be noise or light or traffic issues that are difficult to predict within the scope of legislation, unlike a single-family house or a retail business, which is fairly predictable. We hope most of the time. So yeah, there's so the for a retail business where the use is not identified yet, like in this case, this is a permitted use because it fits the square footage. So a conditional use is not something that's even an option for this applicant. So that wouldn't be available to them and the Planning Commission. They would have to use a legislative function to change the code if the BZA did not approve this.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Sam, sorry, as I recall, conditional uses are not permitted in Oxford. Is that accurate?
So conditional uses we do all the time. I think what you're thinking of is a use variance.
Thank you.
So yeah, there was a time when they haven't been for quite a long time now. Some communities do allow use variances where if there's a use not listed, then you can ask for it to be added. Oxford does, as you said, Chris, conditional uses, which is a separate category under each zoning district that have a higher level of discretionary review that have to go through planning and council first.
Okay. And Sam, Scott had stated that the plans have been reviewed by your office and that the entrance to the back is the only thing that had to be brought to the board because of it being a zoning variance, but that the plans and everything else had been done and approved through your department. Is that accurate?
I couldn't testify to that for sure. It's been so long since I've looked at this. So no, I could look it up and probably report back to you in about 2 minutes.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I'm just trying to verify the authenticity. Zach, can you do that? Please do.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have at least 5115 pulled up on my screen. So there's a number of departments that have relayed their comments back to the applicant at this point, requesting revisions. So it's just going through the normal building permit review cycle. So it's been through kind of that first round of review, and sometimes it takes 2 or 3 rounds before everybody's approved it.
Sounds good. Thank you, Zach. Any other board members have questions for Sam? No other questions. I need a motion to reconvene to regular session.
I so move.
Thank you, Dan. Second.
I'll second.
Thank you, Kate. We're back in regular session. Discussion or motion?
I want to, in discussion, not make a motion yet, but regarding the variance requiring every building to have its principal entrance on a street bordering the lot, I'm good with this variance. I feel positive about this variance. This seems to be a good case for having principal entrance on the first floor and second and a back, the entrance in the back on the second for the residents. My only concern is the safety issue, which I think goes beyond our purview, but again, the pathway and also the lighting issue. And maybe that's just a recommendation. But in terms of the variance itself, regarding the principal entrance upon the street bordering the lot, I will approve this variance. I think there's a good argument. It's a good product. It's a good project. And because of the peculiar shape of the lot and the grade, I think it sounds like it's a good argument to be made.
Thank you, Kate. I have to agree with you. I think that finally getting a building of this quality on that lot after this length of time is a real plus for the city. And to deny that just simply because the entrance to the residences is in the back is doing a disservice. I think the community's got a lot to gain from this, but denying it, we'd have a lot to lose.
Yeah, I guess I would also agree with that, as long as there was a direct pathway, whatever the city considers a direct pathway.
Chris, we talked a little bit about the areas that Zach had shaded in, and we talked with Scott about adding those. Would that help make this a little bit more palatable to you if that was paved?
Sure, but I'd also look to come off the main sidewalk directly to the side sidewalks.
Okay.
So the sidewalk that parallels the street should have a connector. So you wouldn't be tempted to walk across the grass to get to the sidewalk that comes around the side of the building.
Okay.
But that's beyond us. That's not part of this variance.
Right. I think that we could leave that up to Scott. We'll have to put a little trust in him. I think he said that may have been something that he overlooked, but I think he can work on that. Dan, are you?
I'm good with it.
Okay. I saw your hand up there in front of the camera. I didn't know. No problem. Anybody else have any comments? Okay. Can we get a motion for the variance, please?
Would make the motion on BZA 2012, asking for a variance in section 1141.03B, principal entrance on the rear street. I move that we accept the variance and approve it based on the fact that it's not a substantial variance. It does not interfere with governmental delivery of services, and it will not affect the neighborhood.
Thank you. Roger, is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dan. Any other discussion? Okay, Zach, roll call vote, please. And yes, grants the variance.
Okay, I will start with Mr. Ames,
Yes.
Mr. Hazeman,
Yes.
Ms. Rumanier,
Yes.
Mr. Allison,
Yes.
Mr. Schnipper.
Yes, the motion is granted. The variance is granted. Let's move to our second case, and that is going to be BZA 2020-13. Functionally, this is the same, but I still think that because it is a separate variance, we need to at least address this in perhaps an abbreviated, but still giving it a full hearing. So, Zach, are you going to present for the city?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
State your name and job title for the record, please.
Zachary Moore, planner for the city of Oxford.
And raise your right hand for me.
Excuse me, do we have to go back to the other forum meeting? If we're going to have a full.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Roger. Okay. I said abbreviated. I didn't mean that abbreviated. Let's back up a little bit. I need a motion to enter into an adjudication hearing.
So moved.
Thank you, Roger. Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Any objection? Without objection, now we can enter into this. Zach, please state your name and job title for the record
Zachary Moore, planner for the city of Oxford.
and raise your right hand for me. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in matters before this board?
I do.
Please proceed.
Okay. I guess I will go ahead and pull up my prior presentation and just kind of go through the elements again. So this particular hearing is for, now we're focusing on 5111 Morning Sun Road. which is the building that's in the southwest corner of the lot. Same applicant, owner, zoning district use, same section number 1141.03B. Same location, same zoning. And I'll just go through these. Okay, so here's the building in question. And then showing the residential entrance to the back, the commercial entrance to the front. Here are the same renderings. One point I would like to address, so there is the public sidewalk that's shown along West Sycamore Street. It appears that there is a gap between the walkway here along the parking spaces and this sidewalk. So in addition to the red area that's highlighted here, I think this could benefit from having a more direct connection. And I apologize, I meant to include the plan review letter in the packet, but it doesn't look like it had been included. But that was my, there was an original plan review letter that went out to the applicant as part of that first round of the building permit review. And that cited a number of codes that needed to be complied with. And one of those had to do with the pedestrian circulation, which led to the comment concerning these red highlighted areas. And that particular section specifies that internal circulation systems for pedestrians must be clearly defined, minimizing walking between cars or across drive aisles. So it's that particular section that's sort of activated my comment and request to have, more of a, I guess what I'll call a more direct connection going back to those back entrances for the residential units. But I think a natural extension of that, I think there is a rational nexus between the consideration of the principal entrance and the connection of that as it relates to the public street, which is what the provision is all about. It's about addressing the connection between the entrance and the public street. And then in terms of, there was a question previously about lighting. So one of the other standards that was cited in that plan review letter, the zoning code specifies a minimum security lighting level of 1 foot candle for the site. So there will actually need to be some light fixtures installed on the site, and then a photometric plan provided to ensure that adequate security lighting for that back portion for the parking area back there behind the building near the woods is lighted appropriately for security purposes. Okay, and then I know I breezed through these a little bit, maybe a little bit too fast last time, but just to get everybody acquainted again, and this is the same floor plan, it just repeats itself from building to building. But that lower level kind of, I guess what you might call a walkout basement level that has the 2-car garages for the units. So there's 2 parking spaces per unit, a total of 4 parking spaces per building. There's the blue area in the middle, which is the common stairwell that links the basement level to the rest of the floors. Then the first floor plan is the commercial space, and then the potential at least to link up with those commercial spaces off that common stairwell. And then the second floor plan, so this is where the actual front doors to each of the units would be located, right off that stairwell, right where those black arrows are depicted. And then there's also a staircase that is internal to each of the dwelling units. So that's a private staircase. It's not common. And that would be the means of accessing the 3rd floor of each of the units. So you can see the common stairwell disappears at that point. It only goes up to the 2nd floor. You enter the dwelling units from the 2nd floor, and then there's staircases internal to each unit that gets you up to the 3rd floor portion of each of those residential units. Okay, and then I will just, again, the criteria are the same as was testified during the previous case, but I will just summarize the criteria by saying that the board may rely upon the content that is shown in the staff report for each of these criteria. And I would just summarize by saying that criteria A, we find that this does not support the variance. B, we find this supports the variance. We find that C and D both support the variance. Criterion E does not support the variance. F does not support the variance. And G, we find that supports the variance. And I believe that will conclude my presentation and remarks for BZA 2020-13. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Zach. Chris, you got your hand up. You got something?
Yes, just making sure this isn't an issue. When we add the sidewalks, will that change lot coverage and require additional variances?
There would be additional coverage added as a result of that. But I think that could be, and I might rely upon our legal representation for this interpretation, but in a sense, since the BZA is seeing the proposal and understand the consequences of having that additional area, as it relates to this particular request, I think that could, in a sense, get wrapped up and made as a part of this decision. So the increase in coverage, above that original percentage that was locked in the previous case, that could probably be acknowledged at this moment in time, if that's something that is pertinent or important to the board in making their decision on the principal entrance. But again,
I want to make sure that it doesn't create a problem.
Okay. Let's get through with, well, Ben Mazer, are you online?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I am.
Zach just offered something concerning lot coverage. If we grant it with the knowledge that there will be some increased lot coverage due to the sidewalks that we've discussed, is that going to become an issue that could trigger another zoning variance?
No, I don't believe so. I concur with what Mr. Moore said. I think, as long as the record reflects in the motion that's granted, if the variance is granted, that the BZA is aware that there could be some additional lot coverage based upon granting this variance, as long as the BZA indicates on the record that the BZA acknowledges that and is an approving of that, that should be sufficient.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Zach? Okay, without further questions, Zach, thank you. Scott? Scott, are you there?
I am. Do you need to swear me in again?
Different case, same deal. State your name and title for the record, please.
Scott Webb, a licensed Ohio architect representing H&P Properties this evening.
And raise your right hand for me. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in matters before this board?
I do.
Please proceed.
All right. Well, this is, I'll just kind of zip through them. This is the second building. It looks like the other one standing in front of a mirror. Could move to the next slide, please. Likewise, like the first building that we talked about, this grade really falls from the intersection to the rear corner of the property. So the reasons for this and the opportunity that it created are the same as what we described in the last one, sort of based on the Stewart Square model of separating the entrances a little bit differently than we might do in other locations in town, based on the comprehensive design of the site and the fact that the two buildings work together and provide a complete access road around the rear. Next slide, please. Oh, actually, let's go back one. Just address this as it is. So looking at this site plan, which is presumably more accurate than the rendering. The intention would be, I think in the rendering, it looked on the lower left building, the southwest building, it looked as if there was a parallel sidewalk along the handicap area there. Actually, the building isn't showing that, but I think to Mr. Allison's point and also Zach's, those sidewalks that on the southwest building are to the right of the parking, on the northeast building are kind of to the north of the parking. Those sidewalks should be extended in both directions out to the public way along Morning Sun and Sycamore Street, and then around and down to the rear driveways as staff had suggested. So we're we agree and are amenable to make that change and accept the increase in lot coverage that would represent. And then next slide, please. Again, this is just a view. As I think, there was a slight difference from these early renderings. I'm showing a 2-car garage door. We've actually separated them into individual doors for structural reasons, just less span with a 3-story building standing on it. But the principle here is the same. And then next slide, please. As far as the decision standards go, we believe that reasonable return is rather ambiguous in this case for an undeveloped lot. We believe that the variance is not substantial. We're meeting the intent of the code. We believe the essential character is improved. The delivery of government services, including fire access, has been accounted for in the design. The property owners are aware of the restriction, but believe this is a better solution for both the residents and the patrons of the commercial spaces. It's true, a ceremonial entrance could be placed in there, but I think the comments of the board have come to understand that that's not significant and perhaps not necessary. We hope not. And lastly, that we feel the spirit and intent of the zoning code is preserved by granting of this variance. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott. Any questions for Scott from the board members? Okay. We've offered the opportunity to Sam to weigh in. Do you want to weigh in on any of this, Sam?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Need a motion to reconvene to regular session.
So moved.
Second. Thank you. We
I'll
are
second.
back. We are back in regular session. Discussion or motion?
Let me make the motion for consistency.
Go ahead, Roger.
In BCA 2013, in asking for variance to section 1142.03B, principal entrance on the rear street, I move that we accept the motion and grant it based on the fact that it is not a substantial motion. It will not change the status of the neighborhood. It meets the intent, and it will not interfere with governmental delivery of services, with the knowledge and intent that another section of sidewalk might be added, may well take up a little bit more of the lot coverage.
Thank you, Roger. Second.
Second.
Any motion, any discussion on this whatsoever? Okay, without further, it's been moved and seconded. Zach, I need a roll call vote, please.
Okay. I'll switch it up a little bit here. I'll start with Mr. Hazeman,
Yes.
Ms. Rumanier,
Yes.
Mr. Allison,
Yes.
Mr. Ames,
Yes.
and Mr. Schnipper.
Yes. Motion is granted. The variance is granted. I have a question for Ben, however. What we have done is that we somehow flew past this in the previous case where we did not acknowledge that there could be some increased lot coverage due to the sidewalks we discussed. How can that be handled, or should it be addressed?
I think from a legal standpoint, certainly another motion could be called to address that and correct the record. I think that's probably the preferred method for handling this. So basically reopening that case only for the purpose of expressing on the record that the Board of Zoning Appeals is also acknowledging the fact that there could be an increase in lot coverage for the other address as well.
Okay, then that is what we're going to do for the housekeeping portion of this. We're going to look at BZA 2020-12. Do we need to go into adjudication, or can we just address it in discussion and motion?
I believe just discussion and motion is appropriate.
Thank you. Board members, you've heard that. We're going to do the same thing here that we're doing on the other lot with identical buildings. I think what we need to do is remake the motion. And Roger, you made the original motion. Would you care to make the motion on this one to clarify the record?
Yes, I will. For clarification purposes, in BZA 2012, asking for variances section 1141.03B, principal entrance upon the street. I move that we grant the motion based on the fact that it is not insubstantial. It will not interfere with governmental services. It falls within the spirit of the regulations and will not affect the neighborhood, with the knowledge and understanding that we, the BZA board, understand that another section or two of sidewalk that may be put in may well increase the lot coverage.
Thank you, Roger. Second?
Second,
Second,
Thank you. Zach, roll call vote. Yes, grants the motion.
Okay, I'll start with Ms. Rumanier,
Yes.
Mr. Ames,
Yes.
Mr. Allison,
yes.
Mr. Hazeman,
yes.
and Mr. Schnipper.
Yes. Motion's granted, variance is granted, and we cleaned up the record. Thank you, board members, and thank you, Ben. Do we have any new business? None that we know of. Maybe I should ask Scott. Scott, are we going to have a meeting next month? You got to unmute, Scott. You're keeping us in suspense.
Drum roll, please. Yes, I did submit one case for next month, so glad to see you all again next month. Except
Okay.
for Chris.
Can we just go ahead and
Except
do
for
it
Chris, who's
tonight?
apparently tired of seeing me, but
All right. And I don't see anything under old business. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you, sir. Second?
I'll
Second.
second.
And seconded. Without objection, we are adjourned. Thank you, board members. Thank you, Ben, and thank you, staff.
thanks,
Night,
everyone.
Good night.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you. Have a good night.
You too.
Good night, everyone.
Right.